Everyone else is using LLMs or rules, right? Like historically, it's all been rules, which are a nightmare. Then people started using LLMs to do bookkeeping. We have done extensive benchmarking. All of the LLMs are terrible at bookkeeping. Even Fable 5, right, one of the most powerful models in the world, is only 79% accurate at bookkeeping. In accounting, 79% might as well be 0%. And so that's why we've spent 6 years building and training our own bookkeeping models, because nobody else has done this work. And that's how we get up above 98% accuracy.
Yeah, yeah. Bruce.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Bizarre Brews podcast. I'm your host, Adam, and today with us, we have a very special guest today. He is taking on one of the oldest accounting softwares in the company, QuickBooks and Xero. He's building an AI-native ledger system called Digits. And with us today, we have Jeff. How are you doing today?
Great to be here, Adam. Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, perfect. So, Jeff, you have been building in the industry for a very long time, and you've built products that are used by billions of users these days on their smartphones. And I wanted to understand, how has that experience been so far differently from building in the engineering side compared to like the finance side for you?
Yeah, it's been really interesting to sort of, my background has been entirely software engineering, computer science, building software at scale. And Digits is my first company in the finance and accounting space. But it's actually been amazing because a lot of the motivations and the customer passions remind me so much of selling products to software developers. My prior company was in the developer tool space, and software engineers, developers are very detail oriented, very passionate about their product, very nerdy in their own way. And accountants very much are the same in an opposite space. And so it's actually been awesome. There's a lot of very similar personalities, and folks really appreciate our attention to detail with Digits, the care we go to make sure the product works and is deterministic and reliable, and the attention we put into the UI. So it's been a really cool journey so far.
Perfect. So let's start off from the very beginning. You were 13 and you taught yourself how to code.
Yes.
And you launched Gumball Capital. First of all, when you were at 13, what was the first app you developed that you still remember?
Yeah, so that year, my parents gave me the book Mac Programming for Dummies, and I had previously not been into computers whatsoever. But I got this book for Christmas and read it, and I have to admit, I did not really understand what was going on. And I didn't even realize you had to copy files off the CD in order to edit them. So I actually got totally stuck and made no progress. And then 6 months later that summer, I read the book again, realized my mistake, and got the Hello World program working. And the moment the text showed up on the screen, I was like, I should make it print Hello World in orange instead of black.
Yeah.
And so I changed the code and I made it print in orange. And the moment that text turned orange, a light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, oh man, I can make this computer do anything I ever wanted. And that was the moment. I was just like obsessed with software from that moment. So I ended up building a whole bunch of random Mac shareware. This was the mid 90s. I was coding in pure C, Mac desktop software, and it took a long time to build even relatively simple apps. But my first, like, quote, successful app was a graphing program called Histogram.
Okay.
And so for a science class that year, we had to draw a lot of graphs, and I got tired of drawing all these charts, these histograms. And so I asked my science teacher if I could write a program to draw the graphs for me. And I don't think he fully understood what I meant, but he was like, sure, yes. And I then spent the entire school year writing this app, published it on AOL's software library, and finished it just in time to turn in my last homework assignment with a graph my program had generated and printed.
And then were you like one of the early ones in your school that was just working with these applications? Or was there a wave of like young kids just like picking up programming back?
No, it was very, very rare. I grew up on the East Coast in Baltimore, Maryland, and in my entire school, it was a 12-year private school from like first grade to 12th grade. I believe it was only me and one other person in the entire school that knew how to code at that point. So it was very, very rare. And that was part of my motivation for heading out west to college, because I was in love with software and there wasn't much going on in the mid-Atlantic in those days.
Okay, great. So then I want to talk about Gumball Capital. So what I understood, it's a microloan service for like young entrepreneurs to do it. Why start like a microloan service? What was the motivation behind it?
Yeah, this was actually a student group project. So I came out west, got to Stanford, and Gumball Capital, I believe, was our sophomore year, or no, junior year. And it was entrepreneurship week. And so one of the entrepreneurship professors had this challenge of like, who could build the most impactful business in 1 week? And so we got a group of 13 friends together, and one of our friends had crazy ideas his whole college career. He had a couple months prior, on a whim, bought 100,000 gumballs because he got a deal online. So he got this deal for very, very cheap, high volume gumballs. And when 100,000 gumballs showed up, he had a problem. The boxes were so big, they didn't fit in his dorm room. And so he literally moved out all of his dorm furniture and rebuilt his bed and desk and chair out of boxes of gumballs. And so his dorm room was literally just filled, stacked with boxes of gumballs. And so when we were figuring out what to do for this business for a week, we were like, okay, well, we have 1 week and we have 100,000 gumballs. Yeah. What do we do? And so that ended up being the foil for the program. And it was a microloan service inspired by a bunch of programs happening in Africa where you could give out loans to entrepreneurs. And these were very small dollar value loans, but we would basically go around campus and collect philanthropic gifts for this program, and in exchange, give out gumballs. And so you got a package of gumballs as your thank you for donating to the program. And we actually one of my other good friends was a film producer. And so we directed, filmed, produced a whole TV ad about this within the week. We literally were working 24/7 this week. It was ridiculous. And so ended up getting a decent amount of press about this new nonprofit coming out of Stanford that was giving away gumballs in exchange for microloans.
Well, and then when you talk about film, I've seen like you've produced and worked on like a few films. So like you did Gumball Capital, and then you did your project on coral reefs, and then the social dilemma. Like, have you always been interested in making documentaries and films about like issues you cared about?
So this is that same friend who produced that ad, went on to make the climate change films Chasing Ice and Chasing Coral. And we worked very closely together. I was an associate producer on the films. I've cared deeply about climate change since I was little. Even before I learned to code, I was really obsessed with nature and environment stuff and so on. And so that was a great opportunity to help amplify his message. That then became the social dilemma because we made Chasing Ice and Chasing Coral, and we got frustrated that the whole message around climate change still wasn't really resonating with folks, and did a lot of research into that. And Jeff Orlowski, the director producer, realized that actually the issue was misinformation on social media, because there was a lot of people countering the messages in the film with straight up lies about climate change isn't happening, et cetera. And so that then led to the social dilemma, which dove into how polarization and misinformation spreads on Facebook and Twitter.
And then, so what exactly does an associate producer do on these documentaries?
Not a lot, to be honest. I mean, you provide money, you show up to some events, you help promote the film, but yeah, it's not my full-time role.
Okay, what else? If you had like tomorrow, the next 6 months off, what would you produce?
Oh, man, that's a great question. I think there needs to be a film on the AI dilemma. And right, like AI, just like social media, had very, very positive impacts on people and very, very negative impacts on people. And a lot of the mechanics of AI are very similar, but taken to a further extreme, as in like when you're scrolling content on your phone, it's not talking back to you. But the chatbots they're actively keeping you in a conversation, sort of stealing your time, influencing your thoughts, etc. And people are starting to realize this. And I think a mass market film would be very beneficial.
Okay, perfect. I'll look forward to that as a sequel to The Social Dilemma.
We'll see.
Okay, perfect. So then, okay, let's go back to Stanford. So you're over there. Your first job is working with the Apple team, or as like a software engineer intern. How soon after you're there that you start your first company that got eventually sold to Box?
Yeah, relatively quickly. So I got the opportunity to intern at Apple my sophomore year of college, and that had been my dream job going up. had been obsessed with Apple since I had first started learning how to code and always wanted to work for the company. And so I was so excited to get this internship. And it was incredible being at Apple campus in Infinite Loop. This was 2006. So this was before the iPhone. Apple was way, way smaller. I think the whole company was 4,000 people or something. And it was fascinating to see. But what struck me was just how traditional Apple was. And even as an intern, you were given an office. I had like a real office. And if you were working on anything confidential, you had to keep your office door closed. The problem with Apple is everything is confidential. And so even as an intern, my random project, I had to keep my door closed. And it was this very isolating experience. And this, of course, in 2006, this was before Slack and any sort of inter-office communication stuff. And so we would do our daily stand-up meetings. And that was the only time I would see the team I was on apart from lunch. And as an intern, you're like, you want to build more relationships. You want to see more of the company. And I realized that at Apple, you're hired to do one job and everyone is exceptional at their job, but is very sort of siloed and isolated. And that's how they keep the secrecy they do. And so I realized after that summer that I probably didn't want to join full time. I wanted to build things out in the open and be able to talk about them. And startups are incredible for that. And so I ended up starting my first company sort of towards the end of junior year, the next year, and then building it through senior year and then launching right after graduation.
Okay, and what was that first experience like building a company right after? Like, this is probably way different from like the projects you were doing so far in life, because like building a company is like not only just having a great product, but a great team and a great product market fit. When was that first realization for product market fit?
Yeah, we made every mistake in the book.
Yeah.
So we were building document collaboration software. So the idea had been, it was really frustrating collaborating on campus with other student groups, and then by extension into sort of the business world. Anytime you wanted feedback on a document, you had to email it to someone, and then they would mark it up or change it and then email it back, right? This was now 2007, 2008. This was well before Google Docs and online collaboration was really mainstream. And so I got frustrated with that. I wanted to build one of the first online, like in web browser document collaboration tools. And so we started building tech to allow a web browser to render 100 different file formats: Word docs, PDFs, PowerPoints, Photoshop, Illustrator, all the common image formats, of course, et cetera, et cetera. I know this sounds stupid today. Keep in mind, in 2008, this was impossible. Browsers could not render anything. And so we spent months developing technology using Adobe Flash to convert all these file formats and then display them in a browser, and then allow you to comment on them, draw on them, mark them up, etc. And so we built this product, and the product was actually quite cool and pretty good, but we made a ton of mistakes. So our team was 3 CS students, basically my 2 best friends and I, and none of us not only knew anything about marketing, but cared about marketing whatsoever. And so we, of course, launched the product. Back in the day, it was pretty easy to get on TechCrunch. So we were on TechCrunch for our launch. We had a massive spike in traffic. And then by the end of the week, it was back to 0 and no one came back to the site. And we were like, well, now what do we do?
Yeah.
And so that started the long slog of trying to understand how distribution works, how you do marketing, like you post on forums and try to get people to find out about your tool and so on and so on. And so we ultimately ended up growing it to 20,000 users, which I thought was not bad. And we had a bunch of paying users, but it never really reached sort of a hyperscale like that you could fund against. And so we had raised a small seed round, but we weren't able to raise another round after that. And we ended up getting acquired by Box in 2009 for the technology. And so that was actually, we were one of the first companies acquired. One of our competitors was acquired by Google to make Google Docs and slides. And so our tech powered all document display on Box. Google bought one. I believe Dropbox bought another startup. And that was sort of the first era of in-browser collaboration.
Interesting. So from there, when did you get the frustration of crash analytics, where you're like, okay, all of these like things, applications are crashing. I need to do something about it. And also, now I'm curious to learn, like, when do you feel pain and then you start learning about it? Is that like a common denominator? You'll just read everything about it?
That is what I've done for each business. Yeah. I would frame starting a company as the last possible resort. Okay. Like it's a nightmare journey. You're on this roller coaster for years and it's so stressful and just all consuming. the only reason you should start a company is if you become irrationally obsessed with the idea you're pursuing. And so that's what happened. I just became hooked on this idea, and I spent all my time, nights and weekends, like just like diving as deep as I could into it to try to figure it out. And so the same thing happened with Crashlytics. So fast forward 2 years at Box, I was now an engineering manager running their sync team. We were competing with Dropbox. Honestly, Dropbox was crushing us because Dropbox had really good sync technology, and we were just building ours. So Dropbox could sync your desktop files. Box didn't have that initially. And so I was leading the sync team, and sync algorithms are very, very complex and ultimately very buggy. And I spent most of my time figuring out why the sync tools were crashing and trying to understand what happened and then fix the bugs. And that sort of caused me to realize, like, what is the deal with crash reporting and error analysis? Like, this feels like something that we should be able to automate. And so I went to the VP of engineering and asked, like, hey, can I work on crash analysis on the side nights and weekends? Like, I just want to build something separate, and if it's good, we can use it. And to his credit, he was like, yeah, great, sure, whatever. And so I started spending my nights and weekends diving deep into crash analysis and understanding how apps crashed and what you could do about it. And that sort of spiraled into a prototype of what became Crashlytics. And the light bulb moment was I called Mike Krieger, who was the co-founder of Instagram. And this was early 2011, and Instagram was still pretty small. And I asked him, hey, Mikey, like, what do you do about Instagram crashing? Like, I'm sorry to be rude, but it definitely crashes. And he goes, oh, I get more crash reports per minute than I can read. And that was the light bulb moment. I was like, okay, this is a new startup. And so ended up giving notice at Box and then starting Crashlytics.
And then Crashlytics took off. And when did Twitter approach you?
So yeah, we got very lucky with market timing. We scaled from 0 to 300 million devices in 12 months because that was as mobile was ramping. Everyone was building and shipping apps. And back then, the other sort of crazy fact is 10% of App Store reviews mentioned the word crash. The whole mobile ecosystem was so immature and so fragile that there were just all these bugs and all these apps were crashing. So it was a pretty massive problem. So we scaled very, very quickly. And then by October of 2012, I got a call out of the blue from Twitter, and they were like, hey, yeah, have you ever considered working for Twitter? And I was like, no, why would I do that? And they were like, oh, okay, well, we think we might want to like buy you guys. And I was like, weird. Okay, well, let's cut to the chase. How much?
Yeah.
And so on that first call, they named a price, and we were like, yeah, I don't think that's very interesting. Thank you, though. And hung up. And so then didn't hear from them for 2 months. In December, they called back and they were like, yeah, well, we thought about it more and we actually would really like to buy you guys. And I'm like, this is still weird. And they're like, no, at least hear us out. And they literally ended the call with saying like, okay, fine, we will pay for your flights, because I was in Boston at the time. And so they paid for our flights, my co-founder and I, to fly to San Francisco and meet with their team. And that was literally the only reason we said yes. We were like, okay, a free flight to San Francisco, sure, like we'll check it out. So we flew out here and met with Dick Costello and Jack Dorsey and the leadership team. And they actually shocked us with this very thoughtful presentation on sort of the development of the mobile ecosystem, Twitter's role in it, where they saw it going, what role they wanted to play. Mm-hmm. And they had made a major mistake earlier that year with this blog post that sort of killed their developer platform. They had alienated a massive amount of developers who had been building on Twitter, and they wanted to reset that relationship by buying a very popular dev tools company and then making the product free. And so that was the strategy in the deal. And we ended up negotiating until 2 a.m. Christmas morning and got a deal done. And that was actually a fantastic move. So we had joined Twitter. They kept every word they had said. They made Crashlytics free. It scaled to 3 billion monthly active devices. Today, Crashlytics is on roughly 6 billion. It's on effectively every active smartphone on Earth. And so that was the start of the 4-year journey at Twitter.
Okay, so you go to Twitter, and now you're in the product space, and like you're basically the chief product officer at Twitter over there. Do you think this is like where you're going to spend most of your career, or you just knew you were going to build something else?
Great question. So the first 2 years, I was still on the developer tools side. So I was head of developer platform and really enjoyed that role and basically got to lead all of Twitter's APIs and SDKs, and they had a large developer platform and so on. And during that time, Twitter IPO'd. And so we got to see that whole journey, and our team was doing really great there. After Twitter's IPO, you may recall the company hit some rough patches and product growth slowed and sort of flatlined at 300 million users. And the company started facing a ton of churn, not just on users, but also employees, and a lot of sort of internal drama. And as part of that, I sort of offered like, hey, do you want me to move over and lead consumer product instead? And I didn't intend for that to be my forever role. I was trying to help the company get its footing back under them. And so did that for a year, 16 months, something like that. And we were able to ship a lot of stuff and sort of re-stabilize the product. But in that time, the company realized that just given their trajectory, they could no longer afford to run this massive free developer platform that we had spent the past few years building. I was asked to shift over and help sell it because they realized that Crashlytics was too big for them to shut down. It was used by every app. And so we needed to find a home for it that could sustain it long term. And so I spent 6 months then reselling the company I had previously sold and talking with all the major internet platforms. We had a bidding war going. Ultimately, Google won. And so Crashlytics today is now owned and operated by Google as part of their Firebase dev platform, part of Google Cloud. And so after that whole journey, we ended up closing that deal 4 years to the day of the initial acquisition. And so I was like, okay, it's time to step back and consider something new.
Well, did you have like a sell-on clause when you did the initial deal with Twitter? Because that usually never happens, right? So you sold it to a company that got sold into another company.
Yeah, so no, they were two totally unrelated deals.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I didn't benefit at all from selling it again, but I got to see the product and the team survive, which was the most important.
And so you've talked about this in your journey about building digits, where you were frustrated, where from Crashlytics, we had like these really nice dashboards features that nothing existed for finance. And you started building digits in 2018, right before 4 years before ChatGPT came in. And so you have to build, like, there's no agentic tools out there. There's only Intuit, QuickBooks, and then there's Xero. And so initially, did you think like, oh, I want to build a general ledger from the ground up?
So this is a great question. The initial goal was to not have to build the full ledger because we knew that was a 5-year journey. And I initially wanted to build a real-time finance dashboard on top of existing accounting platforms. To do that, you need to be able to do 24/7 live bookkeeping. To do that, you need direct access to the bank feed and to the reconciliations. And neither QuickBooks or Xero had enough APIs to allow us to do that. And so we unfortunately relatively quickly realized in order to achieve our full vision, we had to control the data all the way from the ground up, which meant you ultimately had to build a full ledger.
How's the process of building a ledger from scratch?
Yeah, it is very, very tedious. And so that's why Digits took so long. If you look at the history of the accounting software space, it took Intuit roughly from 1991 to 1996, 5 years, to pivot Quicken into what you would now recognize as QuickBooks Desktop, right? Just like business accounting software is extremely complex. It took NetSuite 5 years and 125 million to bring NetSuite to market. And so it's less the double entry ledger itself. It's more all of the complexity and feature set around that. You need to build thousands of integrations. You need to build all the vendor and customer management. You need to build bill pay and invoicing. You need to build budgets versus actuals and dimensions, department tracking, location tracking. It's just like this depth of features that is crazy. And so that's the journey we ended up going on. And of course, the first couple of years, you're very excited and making good progress. By year 4, we were definitely getting frustrated because it was like, this is a long journey and we still have a long way to go. And the tech had been a challenge. So as you pointed out, in 2018, when we started, AI was not a thing. Machine learning was. And as head of product at Twitter, I had overseen the launch of the algorithmic timeline, which was one of the world's first global deployments of sort of mass market deep learning tech. And so I saw the power of ML, and I was very excited to apply it to accounting, but it's really hard to build and train these models. And to give you a sense of the journey we went on, Digits owns a patent on self-improving regular expression models. Like completely ridiculous. You would never use this today.
Yeah.
But we developed tech where we could automatically write regex to match transactions, and then the regex would evolve as adjacent transactions came in to expand its match set. So precursor to what you can do today.
You also built this bookkeeping firm because you wanted to feel the pain firsthand. How long was that process? What were you doing initially? And how much did you scale it before you're like, okay, we have a good enough data set. Now that's going to build.
Yeah, so this was actually a few years later. So we had basically gotten the full ledger working by the end of 2023. And now we were in the polish phase, but there's a lot of polish. As you can appreciate, so the last 20% usually takes 80% of the time.
Correct.
And so we were thinking of how can we sort of perfect the product as fast as possible. And the best way to do that is to experience it directly. And we had already built a lot of great relationships with tons of accounting firms, but they could only meet once or twice a month. The feedback process was relatively slow. And so we realized we just had to use it. We had to do the work in order to figure out all the bugs. And so we made the decision to hire a handful of accountants, take on 100 real full service accounting clients, and do all the work on our own ledger. And so over the course of 2024, we did over 2,000 month-end closes across these businesses on our own software to shake out all of the bugs. And that's what gave us the confidence to launch last year. So we launched publicly March of 2025 and then sold off the full service business. And so today we're 100% a software company. We used that only as our private beta, but it was incredibly valuable to understand all of the workflows firsthand and to really give us the confidence that we could talk to an accounting firm and say, like, trust us, you can use this because we have literally been using it.
You took a long journey and you learned a lot of lessons, like coming into the accounting space. And now we see a lot of tech founders in like the SaaS or software space now come into the accounting after starting their own companies. And they face a brutal reality when coming into the accounting space where it's not as easy and it's not going to be fast. It's going to take a long time and build that trust.
Yes.
Do you have those conversations with the other accounting founders, and where do they go wrong?
I actually was on a call yesterday afternoon. I won't share the company name, but there's 2 founders just getting started in the accounting space. And I think it was a pretty rude awakening to them to sort of understand the journey they will have to go down. The accounting space is very, very unique. And the reason is there's a lot of workflows in the world that are text in, text out, right? And that's why AI has made such a huge impact on marketing, on customer support, even on legal, where it's basically you're editing a contract. And all of these flows are one-offs, right? You can use AI on one email or one contract or one website, and it's fine. Even coding, you can use AI on one feature, part of your lines of code, right? And it's text in, text out. Accounting is not that. Accounting is structured data and it is holistic. Like the books have to balance and it's a single system. And so when people are thinking of adopting AI for their accounting, you can either layer stuff on top and try to bolt it on, or you can be the system of record. And as we just talked about, being the system of record is a 5-6 year journey. Bolting it on, you're suddenly subject to all the API constraints of all the existing players. And so there is no easy entry path in accounting. The one advantage the space has is it is extremely sticky. So if you manage to break in, you're guaranteed customer retention of a decade or more because people really don't want to change their accounting setups, but getting in is very, very hard.
Do you think it's still a 5-year journey, even with all the tools we have at our...
That is a great question. Yeah, with AI coding and so on, we have seen a 40% lift in engineering throughput thanks to AI coding tools. And so, yeah, maybe there's a path to build a new ledger in 3 years now instead of 5. But it's a very long journey. And I'd say now the bar is raising because everyone's moving faster. And so not only do you have to catch up, but then you need to build everything everyone else just built in the next 3 years while you were doing that. So it's going to be very, very hard to enter the market.
And then, so like having the GL, that's like one of the first places you start with, right? Because I'm in the tax space. I need like a perfect set of books to do the analysis on the tax. I need to get that TB in a solid position to be able to do my book to tax adjustments afterwards. How do you convince an accounting firm who's used maybe like QuickBooks for the last 20 years or Xero or like NetSuite to be like, hey, come try digits? Like, how were those initial conversations like?
Yeah, that's why it was so important that we built our own test firm as our private beta so that we could come into these conversations with confidence. And so it was really building it up. So we didn't start by selling to the top 20 firms. We started by selling to the tiniest firms we could find. And all of these individual solo firm owners, we would show them the product, we'd have them try it with a client or two, build their trust, and it sort of snowballs from there. And so now there's almost 400 firms or more actively using digits with clients. We just announced a couple of weeks ago that CLA, one of the largest firms in the world, has selected digits as their future platform. And so now the momentum's really built, and I think the market validation has set in. So now firms can trust it broadly. Yeah. But you're right, the first year, you have to earn that trust in the space.
So do you think like in accounting compared to like software now, like word of mouth and like seeing this momentum is a lot more beneficial, where if one person comes in, then there's an avalanche of like other people just coming in?
Yes, the accounting space is very, very tight-knit and very dependent on word of mouth. And so that is a huge aspect of the channel. It is, as we started with, it is very similar to software developers. Software developers hate being sold to, but they trust other software developers to point them to cool products. Same thing in accounting.
Yeah. And then, so how did that CLA deal come about? How did that transaction, and what are you guys doing with them? I know you guys helping them build this proprietary model. That's what's in the press release. So what does the proprietary model in this case mean?
Yeah, so we announced this last year at Digits. We have the capability to train firm models, which are our bookkeeping models trained only on the clients of a specific accounting firm. Okay. And this is very, very powerful because it helps firms standardize their accounting practices across their client base. It also allows them to onboard new clients very, very quickly. Because if you imagine a new client coming onto Digits, they might not have a big history. We will use the firm model to basically mimic the work the accounting firm has done for their other clients to bring this new client up to speed, using their best practices, their approaches, their unique templates, and so on. And so that was very, very interesting to CLA. We got connected last fall, and over the course of the spring and winter, did some pilots and programs with them, and came to now this big announcement where we are working with them to bring many thousands of clients over to Digits.
So let's say tomorrow, Jeff, another top 25 firm comes up to you and be like, hey, Jeff, I need your help in training my proprietary model. How long from like the day you guys start the conversation can you finish like training the model now?
So this is also what's very unique about Digits. It solely depends on how quickly they bring the clients over. So our models train continually with every new client added. And so as they bring clients on, the model is always live and up to date. We have spent years on this technical architecture. And to put a fine point on it, in Digits, if you go and edit a transaction, our model learns instantly. And so let's say I moved a transaction, I wanted this thing booked as meals, right? Yep. Another transaction comes in 2 minutes later, it'll mimic what I just did and book it as meals.
Okay, so just like instantaneously like learning on the go.
Instantaneous continual learning. And so that's the power for these firms is they don't have to do extra work. They're not sitting there like training a model. They are literally just bringing their clients over to Digits and doing the accounting work in Digits. The model is trained continually in the back.
So where are the accounting professionals coming in this process now? Do they come in at the review stage? Are they coming at the beginning?
Yes, great question. So our focus is automating the tedium in the month-end close process. And so Digits reliably automates 95% of the tedious work. We describe these as zero-touch transactions. So that is a transaction that Digits has pulled in from your client's banks, cards, payroll, Stripe, Ramp, whatever it might be. Digits pulls it in. Digits books it to the ledger. Digits reviews it. Digits drafts the month-end financial statement for that client. Then the accountant comes in, does the final review, and closes the books without ever editing that transaction, right? That's a zero-touch transaction.
How long does it take for an accountant to get comfortable to be like trust Digits? Because accountants, as you know, like are very like, okay, risk averse. They want to see the entire, like how the sausage is made. So
what we recommend is when folks come in, when you bring a client to Digits, you can set what's called the cutover date. When does Digits start?
Yeah.
What we recommend is actually setting it back a couple months. So let's say you set it 3 months ago, and then you redo that month's close on Digits.
Okay.
The first month, you'll have to do some work, right? You're teaching Digits how you do the accounting. Then you close the books.
Mm-hmm.
Then you do the next month. The second month you do should be way easier because now Digits has learned and it has automated much of the accounting. Then you do the third month. What we found is by the time you do the third month, you're up in that 95% ballpark. And so our goal is to get you to 95%, which means you have only ever touched 5% or less of that client's transactions. We now have firms where across their entire client base, hundreds of clients, they're above 98, right? Their teams are only touching 2% of their clients' transactions. And so we're saving them massive amounts of time.
Okay. And then that, I'm assuming then that plays out into like the accountants spending more time on advisory work.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. So all the firms use this in different ways. So it depends on the firm's motivation. Some firms want to keep their team and double their number of clients. That's great. Some firms want to keep their clients and go much deeper and spend more time on the advisory with those clients. That's great, right? Some firms want to lessen their reliance on offshore sort of third-party bookkeeping services. That's great. It totally depends on what motivation the firm has. You can use the extra capacity any way you want.
Okay. And then how do you handle like all these different edge cases that come up? Because as you know, like you've probably saw it when you were running the firm, every client's different. There's different industries, different rules for like categorizing them and different transactions happening. How does like Digit handle like all the different edge cases we'll see?
So this is the power of the models because our models train per client. They memorize the accounting patterns for each specific client. Mm-hmm. That's our top tier model. Then if that falls through, it falls through to the firm model, which we just discussed. If it falls through that, it falls through to our global model, which is across our entire customer base.
I've been thinking about like this all the time. It's like context is so key, and specifically when you're trying to automate, you collapse and then you expand, which is like the model you're using here.
Context is king in AI. If the model has the context, it can do a good job. If it doesn't have the context, it's going to do a terrible job. And so what we focus on is bringing maximum context to our top tier model, which is the smallest model. It's just about that one business. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't matter what industry or vertical or whatever that business is in, because Digits is memorizing, mimicking its accounting history. And so if a transaction comes in that business has seen before, Digits will be effectively perfect at doing the bookkeeping for it because it mimics what was done previously.
Interesting. So when founders come to me and they're like, okay, we're getting started in here, I tell them like the accounting market is very fragmented and you need to find like one thing you're going to be really good at than the rest of the world and just focus on that. Yep. What was the initial like Digits, when you describe Digits, what does Digits do that's better than any other accounting software in the world?
Without question, bookkeeping automation. So everyone else is using LLMs or rules, right? Like historically, it's all been rules, which are a nightmare. Then people started using LLMs to do bookkeeping. We have done extensive benchmarking. All of the LLMs are terrible at bookkeeping. Even Fable 5, right? One of the most powerful models in the world is only 79% accurate at bookkeeping. In accounting, 79% might as well be 0%, right? That is useless. And so that's why we've spent 6 years building and training our own bookkeeping models, because nobody else has done this work. And that's how we get up above 98% accuracy. And so with enough history and context for a given client, like we now have many examples in production where Digits was 100% correct on the bookkeeping for a given client for a given month.
Do you think we'll ever achieve that 100% from that 98, or do you think there's too many edge cases in the space?
There's too many edge cases. So as you can appreciate, accounting is endlessly complex. There's always these weird one-offs for different clients, and there's always new transaction patterns. So you could have a very reliable business that suddenly takes out a bank loan, right? Mm-hmm. Or does some other financial activity that's unexpected. The AI will take a very good guess at it, but it may not be perfect. And so I don't believe accountants, bookkeepers will ever be eliminated. That's why we frame it as we reduce the tedium. We eliminate the tedium from all the routine transactions so they can focus on the interesting accounting decisions.
Okay, great. So now where do you see like over the next 18 months and 24 months, you've done the hard part of building the GL ledger from scratch. Where do you see like the product going next?
Yeah. So now we've really nailed the bookkeeping and the reconciliations and so on. We now have tech across the full month-end close process. So we just launched all of our review checks. So Digit is now removing the tedium from review. It's like, hey, find all the new vendors for this month. Make sure they were booked correctly. Make sure all my clearing accounts went to zero, et cetera, et cetera. So that's been a big push. We just shipped all of that. And now we're able to give way more intelligence to firms across their client base. And so you can start thinking way more strategically. We just announced a partnership with Ignition, which thousands of firms use for their client billing, on how we can give insight into which clients they are potentially overcharging or undercharging based on the remaining manual work. And so turning Digits really into a platform for the firms.
Yeah, I feel like pricing is like a pretty big like topic that accountants really care about. It's because accountants really don't sell themselves for like their expertise. They're always undercharge. They think they discount their labor a lot more than they should be doing.
Yes.
So they just give that insight to be like, hey, you should actually be charging a lot more because of these complexities, and help them make the case?
That's exactly where we're headed. Yes. And so historically, accountants have all charged for time, not for value. And there's a big motion now to shift to value-based billing, which a lot of the leading firms are actively doing. And that will allow them to sustain and grow their margins even with AI automation, and really align their incentives with the client. Unlike, let's focus on the high value work that the client wants to pay for, not the tedious data entry that the client felt they had to pay for because there was no other choice.
Gotcha. Do you think is Digits being able to be used by business owners directly, like a B2C kind of?
Yes, 100%. So you can go and sign up for Digits directly. What we have found is that a lot of those businesses, if they're very simple, Digits gives them directionally correct dashboards, right? It's never going to hit 100%, but it's good enough for the business owner to understand what's going on. The moment those businesses get more complex, they need an accountant. And so we have a partner directory of the firms we work with, and we are constantly connecting business owners that have just signed up inbound with accounting firms because they need that next level of advice and judgment.
When you say like the business becomes more complex to need an accountant, where's the bright line on that?
The bright line, honestly, is accrual accounting. No business owner understands accrual accounting, right? Like cash basis, relatively straightforward. You can figure it out. The moment folks are like, you might want to depreciate your computer, most business owners are like, what?
Yeah, I paid for it right now.
Yeah, exactly. Then they need an accountant. Yep.
So then any advice for like people now, like a lot of accounting firms I talk to are in their AI journey. Just some people are just getting started, dipping their toes. Some people have deployed it widely.
Mm-hmm.
When someone like just in that initial stage of like their AI implementation journey, where would you tell them to start, and like what kind of pitfalls to like start think about?
Yeah, so there's a few things. Definitely experiment and try as many tools as possible, because you want to get your team and yourself sort of up to speed on what's available today, what's possible in the space, and so on. What we have seen is some firms struggle with decision paralysis. It's not clear who owns the decision in the firm, because a lot of firms are partnerships. And so make sure you have a philosophy and sort of understand top down, like who is going to make this decision? What are the criteria we're going to use? Like what speed do we want to move at? I would say now is the moment. Like all of the top firms are actively selecting their new AI native platforms. And this year, next year is where the whole market is tipping. And so if you are waiting, you're going to be very quickly left behind, because the margin and capacity improvements that these firms are seeing dwarf what you can achieve on legacy technology. And so it's going to make the space way more competitive than it is today.
But don't you see firms say like, oh, we're just going to wait and see who wins, and then we'll just adopt them because we don't want to be the risk takers in it?
That is definitely what some firms are doing. I'd be hesitant to wait too long. I think it's starting to be clear in the market who's leading and who's not. But yes, that is an approach some firms are taking, and it's a risky one.
Yeah. And then we have this where like the market's fragmented, and then accounting softwares or like founders like have this issue of like, hey, are we all just catering to the top 500 firms, or are we going to the long tail of the market, which is another 46,000 CPA firms?
I think you have to address the entire market. And so we are very, very focused, not just on the top firms, but on the long tail as well. And you'll see actually a lot of the accounting influencers come out of the long tail smaller firms. They're not coming out of the big firms. Mm-hmm. And so the smaller firm market is highly passionate, largely underserved, and has a lot of influence in the broader space. So yeah, we care about all sides of the market.
And then when you say like these accounting influencers, that's a good point, because they have these small communities, right? Mm-hmm. So you can't reach one message that's going to resonate with all of them. It's just these smaller communities and these alliances that have been built up, and then that travels through word of mouth. So exactly. So that's like a very good approach of people like reaching in and being like, okay, if I can make a connection there, that will help me resonate on this point and then next point, and then build that momentum as I go forward.
That's exactly right. And it's really important to be authentic with your message. As I said, accountants hate being sold to and sort of told lies that aren't true and so forth. And so we're very, very disciplined with like helping explain the tech, how it works, what are the strengths and weaknesses. We've been in the communities for years now. They want a sort of a trusted, reliable face. And so, yeah, it takes work. And that's, I think, what a lot of founders coming into the space don't appreciate. You can't just go and tweet some things and sell your product.
Yeah. So in the AI dilemma, as we talked about earlier, like there's a lot of misinformation about like accounting tools on like what it can and cannot do. When you have those like honest like conversations with accounting firms, what do you tell them right now that like AI cannot do right now, but it should be able to do in the future?
So it'll be really interesting to see as the LLMs continue to evolve. It is still the case that they broadly cannot do math, right? They can do basic math. They cannot do complex math. And they can subtly get the math wrong in ways that is extremely hard for a human to pick out. And so just as an example, give an LLM a moderately complex P&L and balance sheet and have it analyze it for you. I promise you there's going to be a math mistake in its analysis somewhere. And those are really hard to identify. And so we've gone to extreme lengths to prevent AI models at Digits from ever doing math. We have built calculator tools, financial modeling engines, et cetera, that we give our agents as tools they can use, and we block them from trying to do the work themselves. And so that's the level of detail I mean. Like we take the approach of show, don't tell. I want to show all the work we've done and how sort of deeply thoughtful we've been about the space. And usually accountants then appreciate that, and that builds trust. And then they try the product and they're like, okay, I can see all that coming together.
Okay. Like let's talk about product roadmap. Build a great product. I've like used it. I've even connected some of the APIs. I've been like using it with Bizora. I feel like MCP and connections are like the way to go as all our tools get connected. What does the next 12 months look like for Digits right now?
Yeah, I can't share our future roadmap. Yeah. I will say there are a lot of more MCP tools coming, so stay tuned. We have a solid set right now, but it's about to become a lot more powerful. And this plays into something I care deeply about. So as we discussed earlier, my prior company was in the developer tools ecosystem. My background is a software engineer. I love software developers. I philosophically believe in open APIs, and it has been fascinating to see the other major ledgers in the space right now limiting or charging for their API access, which is crazy to me. And so Digits has a free API, open API. We actually had a semi-competitor approach us this past week on like, can we build your API? And I answered directly and I was like, yeah, sure. It's free and open. Go for it. Yeah. And it's like, I believe in the power of the broader ecosystem, and MCP is an extension of that. And so we want to make the full power of Digits available via the MCP tools as well.
Yeah, that would be really interesting to see, because like right now when people say like MCP, they promise a lot more than what it can do. Like, hey, can I just prepare my books chatting through Claude right now? And the answer is more for like the existing legacy tools that have just released an MCP. The answer is a flat no.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. For a lot of them, like you can't even pull a trial balance using the MCP. It's mind blowing. And so, yeah, we've taken the opposite approach.
Okay, perfect. So I really love that approach with like open connectivity. My personal thesis has always been like that's where all the work will be done. People should not be able to do that kind of like minute, like manual work again and again. And they should move on to like more being an advisor role for the future. Okay, so where do people like find Digits? What kind of conferences are you gonna be at? Where can they reach out to you?
Yes, great question. So we are digits.com, super simple. reach out, sign up on our site. You can start a free trial, check out the product, or ping our team. We're happy to chat. We are talking with dozens and dozens of firms every single week. We run open office hours every single day. And so come on and sign up for one of our office hours. Our team of accountants, we have real accountants on our team who guide and help train accountants on digits. You can meet with them literally every day of the week. And so that's another big differentiator. Some of the other platforms are very hard to get questions answered, very hard to get in touch with a human. We care deeply about this. Our team's available literally every 24 hours. And so easy to get in touch. And then, conferences. We're at all the major accounting conferences. I gave the keynote at Scaling New Heights a couple months ago in June. We'll be at a bunch of the conferences in the fall. I think it's probably more, instead of listing them all off, just any major conference in the accounting space you go to, our team will likely be there. So come say hi.
Okay, perfect. Well, Jeff, this has been great. I learned a lot from you. Like, your journey has been great. And you've taken like such a long path, because I know that's like the hard thing to do, and to build it like directly from scratch and do it the correct way. So thank you so much for doing that, and like opening up the doors. It brings a lot more competition, more innovation in the technology space. And we need that as the next phase of accounting moves, tech moves forward in this era. So thank you so much. And for the listeners, thank you so much for listening, and have a good day.
Adam, thanks so much for having me. This was awesome. Great questions. We'll talk soon.
Yeah, yeah.